Clear thinking sounds simple, but few people practice it. Richard Feynman spent his life explaining why. Most people believe they understand more than they actually do. The mind repeats familiar words and accepts them as knowledge. You hear an idea many times, so it begins to feel true. This sense of comfort becomes a signal that the idea is clear, even when it isn't. Feynman explained that this is where confusion begins. The mind trusts recognition instead of real understanding. It relies on memory instead of structure. When you try to explain an idea in plain words, you notice that parts are missing. This is the moment when real understanding begins. Real understanding starts when you notice how easily the mind accepts unclear ideas. Feynman used a simple rule to test understanding. You understand an idea only if you can explain it in plain language. The words must be simple, the steps must be clear, and the message must make sense to someone with no background. This rule exposes gaps the mind usually hides. When you use simple words, the idea must stand on its own. If you cannot explain it, there is a missing link in your thinking. Feynman said, this is a helpful signal because it shows you where to look and what to fix. This test moves you from vague recognition to solid understanding. It forces your mind to work through the idea instead of repeating familiar terms. It also frees you from the illusion that complex words equal deep knowledge. When your explanation becomes clear and simple, the idea becomes real in your mind. An idea becomes clear only when you can state it in simple language. The mind often confuses knowing a phrase with knowing the idea behind it. Feynman pointed out that people feel confident because the words sound familiar, but familiarity is weak proof. It shows only that you have heard the idea before, not that you have understood it. When you try to explain the idea step by step, the gap becomes clear. You notice parts you cannot express and jumps in your reasoning that have no real connection. This is not a failure. It is a useful moment. Feynman treated this gap as a tool. When his explanation broke down, he went back, looked at the missing piece, and rebuilt it. He used the gap to make understanding stronger. This is how you move from repeating words to knowing what the words mean. You cannot rely on familiarity to measure understanding. Complex language can hide confusion. When you use big words, the mind can skip the real work and lean on the sound of the sentence instead of the structure of the idea. Feynman avoided this because he wanted to see the idea clearly. Simple language removes the cover. With plain words, every step must make sense. You must say exactly what the idea is, not what it sounds like. Weak reasoning becomes visible right away. If something is unclear, it shows itself. Feynman used this method for himself because simple words force the mind to slow down and examine each part. They show whether the idea has a solid base or whether it is built on confusion. Simple words do not make an idea smaller. They make it honest. Clear ideas survive simple language. Unclear ones do not. Feynman believed that clear understanding comes from structure. You cannot treat an idea as one large block. You must break it into small parts that make sense on their own. Each part must connect logically with the next. This process is simple but powerful. When you break an idea apart, you see what each piece does. You see where the idea begins, how it moves, and how it ends. You remove confusion by making the structure visible. Feynman often rebuilt ideas piece by piece. If one part did not fit, he fixed it. If two parts did not connect, he found the missing link. This made the idea strong and easy to explain. When you understand each part, the whole idea becomes clear. The mind can follow it without strain. You also become less dependent on memory because the structure supports itself. Understanding grows when each part of an idea is clear on its own. Clear thinking depends on checking every step of your reasoning. Feynman treated this as basic discipline. If one step does not follow from the one before it, the whole idea becomes unstable. The mind often assumes the steps are correct because they feel familiar, but familiarity is not proof. You must look directly at each step and ask if it truly leads to the next. When you test each step, weak links appear. You see where your thinking jumps too fast or where an idea has no support. Feynman treated these weak points as opportunities. He repaired them with better reasoning or removed them completely. This prevents errors from spreading. When each step is solid, your whole chain of thought becomes reliable. The idea becomes easier to explain because its structure is strong. Testing your logic is slow at first, but it becomes natural with practice. Strong understanding rests on a chain of steps that each makes sense. Many unclear ideas come from hidden assumptions. These assumptions sit in the background and shape your thinking without your awareness. Feynman taught that you must uncover them because they often weaken your understanding. The mind accepts assumptions because they feel normal, but normal does not mean true. To think clearly, you must bring each assumption into the open and test it. You check whether it is correct, whether it is useful, and whether it supports your reasoning. When you expose assumptions, confusion begins to fade. Weak or false assumptions can be removed. Strong ones can be kept and used with confidence. This makes your thinking cleaner and more stable. Feynman used this approach in scientific work and in everyday reasoning. It helped him remove noise from his thinking. Clear thinking requires exposing and testing every assumption. Rebuilding an idea from scratch is the final test of clear understanding. Feynman used this method to check whether each part made sense and whether all parts connected cleanly. When you rebuild an idea in simple words, you create a full picture of your understanding. You rely on your own reasoning and not on memorized phrases. If you get stuck, it means something is unclear. You can return to that part and improve it. This cycle of breaking, testing, and rebuilding makes your understanding stable. It removes weak parts and replaces them with clear reasoning. Over time, the idea becomes easy to explain and easy to remember. Rebuilding also shows that your understanding is not dependent on outside authority. It comes from your own mind. You understand an idea only when you can rebuild it fully on your own. When an idea is clear, the mind holds it with less effort. Feynman's method improves memory because it forces you to process an idea deeply. Deep processing creates strong memory traces, which makes recall easy and long-lasting. Clear thinking also supports focus. Confusion divides attention and increases mental load. When an idea is broken into parts, tested, and rebuilt, the load drops. The mind works with clean structure instead of scattered impressions. This leads to steady focus. You can stay with the idea without strain. You can also connect it to new ideas more easily because its structure is visible. Feynman used this approach to learn faster and remember more. He trained the mind to treat clarity as the normal state. Clear understanding supports strong memory and steady focus. Clear thinking is a habit, not a single act. Feynman treated it as a daily practice. Each time he learned something new, he explained it in simple words, broke it into parts, tested its steps, and rebuilt it. You can use the same process. When you learn something, ask yourself to explain it in plain language. break it into small parts. Test each step to see if it makes sense. Rebuild the idea from scratch. This practice strengthens your thinking over time. It removes confusion before it becomes a habit. It also builds confidence because you rely on your own reasoning. Clear thinking becomes faster and easier as you repeat the process. The mind becomes trained to avoid shortcuts and stay with the real idea. Feynman used this method because it worked. Clear thinking becomes natural when you practice it every day. Feynman believed that honesty is the base of clear thinking. When you admit that you do not know something, you give yourself the chance to learn it. When you hide gaps, they grow and weaken your reasoning. Honesty removes pressure. It frees the mind from defending unclear ideas. Instead, you can examine them, fix them, or replace them. Feynman often said, "It is better to say I do not know than to pretend." This approach keeps your thinking clean. It helps you stay focused on what is true. It supports the habit of returning to the basics and rebuilding your understanding from solid ground. Clear thinking grows from clear honesty. Clear understanding grows when you accept what you do not know. Feynman's work shows that clarity is not a natural gift. It is a method. You build it by checking your thoughts, using simple words, testing each step, exposing assumptions, and rebuilding ideas from scratch. When you treat clarity as your default mode, confusion becomes easy to notice. You begin to see where your thinking is strong and where it needs work. The mind becomes steady because it relies on structure instead of repetition. This method turns understanding into a reliable process. You no longer depend on how familiar an idea feels. You depend on how well you can explain it. Feynman made this the center of his thinking. You can do the same. Clear thinking becomes possible the moment you choose it as your basic way of understanding.